When we examine the history of the Second World War, the focus often lands on generals, troop movements, and campaigns, on the tactical brilliance or failures of men in uniform. Yet, lurking beyond these familiar narratives are episodes so horrifying, so devoid of reason or humanity, that even those who orchestrated the Nazi regime recoiled from them. This is the account of one such dark chapter. It tells of a man who was neither a strategist nor a soldier of honor. He was a criminal, convicted and condemned, yet given the mantle of authority over life and death, commanding a unit drawn from the dregs of society. Oskar Dirlewanger became a symbol of terror on the Eastern Front. His brutality surpassed comprehension, and his indifference to human suffering appalled even seasoned SS officers, many of whom repeatedly sought to have him court-martialed. Yet he endured, shielded by the highest echelons of Nazi leadership. Understanding Oskar Dirlewanger is confronting the nightmarish reality of a system that discards morality entirely, unleashing its imprisoned monsters upon the world. To trace his descent, we must journey to a time before the Third Reich existed. Oskar Dirlewanger was born in September 1895 in Würzburg, Germany, into a middle-class family of ordinary means. When the First World War erupted in 1914, he enlisted in the Imperial German Army, joining countless young men swept into the conflict. In the Western Front trenches, he proved himself fearless and capable, sustaining multiple injuries, commanding an infantry company, and earning the Iron Cross. Had his story ended there, or had he quietly returned home, Dirlewanger would be remembered merely as another Great War veteran. Instead, 1918 shattered him, as it did many others. He came back to a Germany in turmoil, the empire replaced by the fragile and politically fractured Weimar Republic. Struggling to adapt to civilian life, Dirlewanger joined the Freikorps, paramilitary groups of disillusioned veterans, engaging in violent street clashes against communists and political adversaries. Violence became his language. The decade of the 1920s bled into the 1930s, and Dirlewanger's life unraveled further. Alcohol consumed him, stability eluded him, and he drifted from one aimless job to another. Early in the Nazi Party, he sought belonging among extreme nationalists, but his behavior remained a liability. In 1934, his life hit rock bottom. Arrested and convicted for the statutory rape of a minor, he was imprisoned, stripped of military honors, and expelled from the Nazi Party. Following his sentence, he was briefly detained in a concentration camp. In any functioning society, Dirlewanger's story would have concluded there. Yet, fate offered him an unlikely lifeline through Gottleberger, a former comrade from the First World War, who had risen to become one of the most influential figures in the SS, reporting directly to Heinrich Himmler as head of the SS main leadership office. Remembering his old ally, Berger maneuvered to secure Dirlewanger's release, partially restored his military record, and even dispatched him to fight in Spain with the Condor Legion during the Spanish Civil War to rehabilitate his reputation. By 1940, as the Second World War erupted, the SS was expanding rapidly. Berger proposed an unusual and audacious idea to Himmler. Germany's prisons were filled with poachers and men convicted of hunting illegally. Though criminals, they were highly skilled marksmen and survivalists, adept in the wilderness. Why waste them behind bars when their abilities could serve the Reich? Himmler agreed, and the man appointed to command this unprecedented penal unit was Oskar Dirlewanger. At first, the formation was modest, referred to as the Poachers' Command. Their mission took them to occupied Poland, officially to track and eliminate partisans and resistance fighters concealed in the dense forests. Yet, from the outset, the unit proved uncontrollable. Discipline was virtually non-existent. Under Dirlewanger's leadership, the men quickly turned into a violent, heavily armed mob. They looted villages, extorted locals, and sank into deep corruption. The situation deteriorated to the point that German civilian administrators and regular SS police units in the region sent urgent complaints to Berlin. Any ordinary officer would have faced execution for the chaos Dirlewanger sowed. SS judges conducted formal investigations and recommended severe punishment. Once again, Gottleberger intervened, shielding his old comrade from the consequences of his actions. Rather than being dissolved, the unit was relocated further east, into the vast and merciless terrain of Belarus following the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. It was there that the Dirlewanger Brigade transformed into something monstrously efficient. The Eastern Front was no typical battlefield. It was a war of ideology and extermination. Belarus's immense forests and swampy lands had become a sanctuary for Soviet partisans, constantly striking at German supply lines. The Wehrmacht struggled to counter this elusive threat and resorted to extreme measures. Dirlewanger's unit received the grim task of pacifying the area. By now, the composition of the force had drastically shifted. It was no longer a mere band of poachers. Due to mounting German casualties, the SS began recruiting from the depths of the prison system. Men convicted of grave offenses, murder, assault, insubordination, were transferred to his command. Soon, hardened criminals and psychopathic inmates from civilian concentration camps were drafted directly into the brigade. Anyone considered excessively violent or unmanageable in society was handed a rifle and sent east to serve under Dirlewanger. With this army of the condemned, Oskar Dirlewanger orchestrated a reign of terror that almost defies comprehension. Locating partisans in the dense forests was nearly impossible, so Dirlewanger adopted a ruthless strategy. He targeted civilians suspected of aiding the resistance. Entire Belarusian villages would be encircled in a horrifyingly systematic fashion. Men, women, and children were confined in barns or large wooden churches, which were then set ablaze. Machine guns swept the exits to prevent escape, turning homes of the innocent into furnaces of death. The scale of destruction is staggering. Historians estimate that the Dirlewanger Brigade obliterated over 200 villages in Belarus alone, slaughtering tens of thousands of unarmed civilians. Expansive swaths of the region were reduced to depopulated, scorched earth. Even within the ruthless machinery of the SS, Dirlewanger's conduct inspired revulsion. Regular army officers refused to cooperate with his unit. SS judges, including the renowned investigator Conrad Morgan, compiled detailed records of his unauthorized killings, extortion, and total abandonment of military discipline. They appealed to Himmler, urging that Dirlewanger be executed. Himmler, however, influenced by Berger's persistent advocacy, ignored these warnings. In the perverse logic of Nazi leadership, Dirlewanger carried out the vile tasks no one else could stomach. His terror was the exact instrument Berlin demanded. The ultimate manifestation of the brigade's notoriety occurred in August 1944. As the Red Army approached the Vistula River, the Polish Home Army launched a massive uprising to reclaim Warsaw, the nation's capital. It was among the most desperate and intense urban battles of the war. The German garrison was caught off guard, and Himmler issued orders for uncompromising reprisal. He decreed that every resident be killed and the city leveled to send a chilling warning across Europe. To execute this mandate, Himmler deployed his most ruthless units, including the Dirlewanger Brigade. Upon entering the WWII district of Warsaw, Dirlewanger's men committed not conventional urban warfare, but a methodical and industrial-scale massacre. Freed from any constraints of engagement and confronting mostly unarmed civilians alongside lightly equipped insurgents, the brigade swept through Warsaw methodically, moving street by street, house by house, basement by basement. In just a few days during early August 1944, tens of thousands of Polish civilians were executed in a systematic campaign of slaughter. It stands as one of the deadliest massacres of non-combatants in the entire Second World War. The havoc caused by Dirlewanger's forces was so extreme and uncoordinated that it actually undermined the German military effort. Erich von Dembowski, the general tasked with quelling the uprising, a man infamous in his own right for war crimes, pleaded with his superiors to withdraw Dirlewanger's men from the city. Von Dembowski argued that the unit's obsession with killing and looting rendered them ineffective against the determined Polish resistance. Eventually, the brigade was removed, but the devastation had already been inflicted. For orchestrating this campaign of near-exclusive civilian murder, Oskar Dirlewanger received the Knight's Cross. It was a grotesque reflection of the regime's values, a system that awarded its highest military decorations to someone who masterminded the annihilation of innocents. Yet the Third Reich was collapsing, and Dirlewanger's fortune was nearing its end. By late 1944 and early 1945, the Red Army advanced relentlessly into Eastern Europe. Germany, desperate for manpower, officially upgraded the Dirlewanger Brigade to SS division status, though the unit rarely had enough men to justify the title. They were thrust into the front lines in Slovakia and Hungary, ordered to resist regular, heavily armed Soviet forces. The results were catastrophic. A unit composed of convicted criminals, psychopaths, and men, experienced only in terrorizing defenseless civilians, faced tanks, artillery, and seasoned Soviet infantry. Morale was non-existent, cohesion absent, and the soldiers had no willingness to sacrifice themselves for Germany. As soon as combat intensified, the division collapsed. Entire battalions deserted. Some men shot their own officers before fleeing into the forests. Casualties were catastrophic, proving that while they excelled at slaughtering the helpless, they were utterly incapable of conventional warfare. Dirlewanger himself abandoned his men. In February 1945, he was wounded in the chest during fighting in Germany and evacuated to the rear, leaving the remnants of his division to their fate. When the war concluded in May 1945 and top Nazi officials either fled or took their own lives, Dirlewanger chose to hide. Stripping off his SS uniform, he assumed civilian clothing, adopted a false identity, and took refuge in a remote hunting lodge in southern Germany, hoping the post-war chaos would allow him to disappear unnoticed. Yet history pursued him. In June 1945, French occupation forces identified him. He was arrested and sent to a prison camp in Altausen, placed in a cell awaiting trial that would almost certainly have ended with a death sentence. But Oskar Dirlewanger never stood before a court. On the 7th of June, 1945, he died in his cell. Official records claimed natural causes, but the truth was far grimmer. Evidence and eyewitness testimony indicate that he was beaten to death by his guards over several days. Some of these men were former Polish prisoners who understood exactly who they were punishing. The man who had inflicted unimaginable suffering, whose life had been defined by cruelty and violence, died alone on a cell floor, killed by those his regime had sought to annihilate. The story of Oskar Dirlewanger is difficult to recount. There is no heroism here, no tactical brilliance, no tragic flaw worthy of debate. He embodied the darkest impulses of humanity. Yet this tale is essential. The Dirlewanger Brigade was no anomaly. It was the inevitable outcome of a system that placed ideology above morality and obedience above human life. Oskar Dirlewanger was precisely the creation of the Third Reich, when it decreed that some lives were expendable. Remember his story. Let it serve as a warning that when cruelty is rewarded and conscience ignored, monsters rise in plain sight. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.